things, and we talked about this on the show a couple weeks ago, things really took a drastic turn. There we go. and losing to the worst team in college baseball, I would say probably the worst team in college baseball outside of a couple, obviously the worst team in SEC history in Missouri, who after beating sweeping Texas A&M in Blue Bell Park, I do remember, obviously I do not travel for those all those games. It's just something I don't do for my other job. So I was actually watching on TV. I actually went to the gym on the Friday. They were up, I think it was 6-5-0 in game one. I came back thinking, okay, this game's over. And then that slow unravel, I remember watching it, and I was talking to one of my writers at Aggies Wire, and I was like, do you really think this is the start of something horrible? I was kind of joking. And it was. It was literally the start of something horrific that we had not seen really since the beginning of the season. And mainly when we saw A&M get swept, it was just because this team had not found the things that were working for them. They really hadn't developed any chemistry together. They really just didn't understand like what they had to do to get these type of wins. But after beating LSU 2 out of 3 games, winning that series at home, Caden Sorrell hitting basically a walk-off home run, I think he hit in the 8th or something on the final Sunday to win that series. You thought it's going to be a cakewalk, right? Because Missouri had one of the worst pitching staffs coming in. The ERAs were like 10 for all these guys, basically. I'm trying to think if their day 2 starter, he's the backup quarterback, I believe, for the Tigers. And he literally made A&M's batting lineup look like a joke. And I can't even talk about this with a straight face sometimes because it's so confusing, because you go into the week and you think this team might be done now because everybody from Kendall Rogers to all these other college baseball experts have basically said A&M just had to beat Missouri. They had to just sweep that team and they'd probably be in the NCAA tournament. You go into this week, that last week, knowing that you had Georgia on the road to finish the SEC regular season, and you basically had to sweep them to have any chance. You'd have to go into the SEC tournament, which began today, and win a couple games at least, and then you maybe have a chance. Well, that team, again, they don't have a midweek game. They go to Friday. Justin Lampkin, who deserves a ton of credit for, obviously he's going to make a lot of money now with that performance.
He pitched great. I mean, was it 15 strikeouts?
Yeah.
Just completely dominant stuff.
Exactly. And it was great to see, because I thought maybe but again, one of the reasons that I didn't think this was like a turnaround for them was because of the offense. I mean, they could only muster any runs off of home runs. That's been the situation all season. This team cannot hit consistently. So they have to rely on the long ball to get it done. And so when I saw that, I'm like, okay, well, it's a great win for Lampkin. It's a complete game, career night for him. Again, dude might get drafted higher than we all expected. But then you go into Saturday, and it's just much of the same for A&M. They end up losing those last 2 games. They are hanging on for dear life with any postseason hopes, and it's really probably going to rely on winning the SEC tournament. They play – again, the irony of it all, they play the hottest team in the SEC right now, Mississippi State, tonight at 8 p.m. And, it's hard to give them a chance in that game. I can't really say that because it's the SEC tournament. I see these teams just kind of randomly play well all the time. But what do you guys thought on how this season's kind of derailed? And we're going to get to it at the end, but do you think this basically puts head coach Michael Earley's, career in Aggie land to an end?
I mean, I think that's got to be on the table because, look, when we started 1-9 in conference play, there were folks shouting from the rooftops that they thought it was a done deal that he was going to be gone. And then, of course, the team did go on that run you talked about where they beat a bunch of teams that really we didn't expect them to, and everyone kind of thought that, okay, now we finally righted the ship. They've figured some things out. They've come together, whatever it was. And yeah, it's just kind of the icing on the cake of an exceptionally frustrating season, because ultimately, after all that work that they did to actually make some hay in the middle of their conference slate, like you said, all they had to do was do what literally every other team did, and that was sweep Missouri. And I just really fathomable to not only just to drop a game, because if you had just dropped a game to Missouri, people still would have talked about it in a negative light because it would have been their only win on the year. So to actually get swept by that team, to be honest, was an embarrassment for that A&M baseball team. And I hate to throw stuff out like that because it sounds overly dramatic, but I think that's what it was. And when you compound all of that with all of the struggles over the entire year after coming into the year as the consensus number one team in the country, and now staring in the face of, like you said, barring a deep SEC tournament run, maybe even having to win the SEC tournament to make the postseason. If you go from being the preseason number one to missing the tournament, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we'd be the first team to ever do that.
Yeah, it'd be the first time, I think, in baseball history, because you got to kind of look back at some of the former number ones, equally talented A&M, equally veteran laden, obviously from starting pitching to you've got big hitters, you got contact guys, you got everything, right? You got everything in that lineup. So that's the thing. That's why it's just so insane to think that, and we can talk about, obviously I want to get Will's take after this, but we can talk about just putting all the blame on Mike Earley. But there's something else too. You got to look at the assistants, you got coaches, you got to look at the hitting coach, Caleb Longley, who was kind of a random hire in my opinion. It was I remember when it happened, I really didn't know anything about him, to be honest. And I keep track of these coaches for the most part. And I thought that was a very wild card, risky thing to do for a team that, in my humble opinion, you get a hitting coach that's really worth a damn, and somebody who's been around the block and has had a lot of success, maybe just hasn't become a head coach for various reasons, we would not be talking about the situation right now. I almost guarantee that. I almost guarantee that if you had better hitting for this team this season, they'd be safely in the NCAA tournament by this time tonight.
I'll say one thing. This university loves doing things that have never been done, and not in a good way. I'll leave it at that. So I wanted to make sure I had the right numbers on this before I said this. So Missouri came into that series against A&M at Olsen Field, on A&M's home field, and swept us after being 0-24 or whatever they were, 0 and a billion. Sweep us, and then they go play. They host Mississippi State, who A&M will play possibly tomorrow. I think there's some weather things that are happening right now that may postpone it. Mm-hmm. Here are those scores for you. And Mississippi State won all these games, by the way. 25-7, 13-3, 12-1.
Yikes!
Those last two were run rolls. It's the most, I know I do this on every episode, but it's like for a football analogy, it's like mashing together the 2021 2022 seasons where you have because they did some it's not like we went out and beat a bunch of bad teams to get our SEC wins. Like we took a series from Tennessee, who's in the top 10 or was number one at the time, Arkansas, who's top 5, LSU I think is number 1 right now. You won series against all of those teams, but you couldn't win a series against Kentucky. You got swept by the lowest team, completely dreadful team in the conference in Missouri. And, to go back to football, I think that the Missouri thing to me is the App State. That's a perfect comparison in my opinion, because it may even be worse than that, to be quite honest, because Missouri is just not a competitive, serious SEC baseball program. I get they beat us. I don't care. That's still a fact.
But that's the thing. That's the worst part of it, because I would say this about App State. I love, if we had a Longhorn on here, that's all he'd talk about, and he'd be laughing with his little hat on and stuff. And I get that. That's the butt of every joke. That was actually my first year. God, I can't even think back to that. That was my first year covering the team, actually. That was my third or second game or whatever. I remember that day pretty well. But at least I think App State was at least competitive. I would say they're a competitive program. Yeah. Missouri seemingly doesn't really care, at all. I think that university, I remember I saw an article, I followed a Missouri beat writer, and it was just basically the chancellor and everybody, maybe we should pay attention to baseball. Like maybe now we should, because I don't even know what the funds they put into it. It's not a program they really care about at all.
There's
It's
probably
there's
probably a bigger talent gap between A&M baseball, Missouri baseball than A&M football and App State football, if we're being honest.
Yes. Exactly.
But like to bring that all together, like 2021, you lost some embarrassing games as well, but then you beat Alabama, who was number one and like this awesome team, and like it makes no sense why this season played out the way it did. I mean, if they had beaten the Kentuckys and Missouris of the world but lost to Arkansas and Tennessee, I would understand that. Like that makes sense to me. But this was just the most mind-boggling season results that like no one could have predicted this at any point. Like early on, you would say, "Oh, we're not going to start 1-9 in conference play," and then after that, you wouldn't say, "Oh, we're going to beat Tennessee," and Arkansas and LSU. Like, and then it's this huge roller coaster. And unfortunately, I think the roller coaster is at the end of the season is on a very, very low point.
Yeah, and I think this is what we're going to obviously get to next. Is that you look at. So I kind of have it actually here. So Michael Earley's contract, and you talk about baseball, Mississippi State's ex-head coach that was recently fired. One of the reasons why that happened was obviously Mississippi State was kind of going downhill. This was a team that had won the national championship, I believe, 2019, 2018. It was very recently. And one of the reasons he was fired was he was getting paid, I believe, $1.5 million. And that's a lot for a college baseball coach. I remember the days in the early 2000s when these guys were getting paid like $200,000 a year, which is still a lot of money. But in college athletics, it's like that's the lowest besides like softball coaches and golf coaches and stuff like that. And, when you're Mississippi State, you have a lot of resources in football. You have a lot of resources in basketball, obviously very competitive. Well, football's not that competitive, but they're still a big time SEC program. Basketball obviously is very competitive, so they're going to pay very nicely there. So when they look at the baseball program, they're going, why are we paying this guy $1.5 million? He's not producing. Let's move on. For Texas A&M, Michael Earley's contract, I believe it was a 4-year. I think his base is about $900,000, increases to $950 in year 2, $1 million in year 3, and $1.05 million in year 4. So from a financial standpoint, he's getting paid pretty well for a guy who wasn't a paid assistant until his second year, I believe, with Texas A&M at that point. So again, it was a big gamble to hire him in the first place. We all remember back then of, the whole thing of the players going on social media. We want Early. He's our choice. We'll come back if he comes. And I always thought that was very weird. And from an outside point of view, I was like, okay, I get it. You want to keep the talent, but they're dictating everything. It goes back to the Mark Stoops thing where like the fan base kind of thinks they have a lot of power now because they bullied them into hiring Mike Elko, where I wasn't behind the scenes. Maybe that was the case when that happened. I think it had a part to do with it because I think Ross Bjork kind of, for better terms, crapped his pants and thought, I shouldn't make a bad decision here because it seems like a big voice in the Texas A&M fan base despises this when Billy Liucci leaked it. So, I'm not saying that they have this power now with Michael Earley. I just think it's one of those situations where you really have to weigh the pros and the cons here of, is this just a coach that's going through the ups and downs of his first season? Or is this just a gamble that didn't pay off because he just doesn't really know what he's doing? You need to bring in a more veteran voice, someone who's been around the block, who's been coaching for 20 plus years and just knows how to, utilize talent, because maybe that's an issue, right? There's too much talent on this roster. And we can talk about Jace Lavalette because he's had one of the worst stretches over the past 2 weeks. I don't think he's gotten a hit in the last 5 games or something. He's a strikeout machine. He just does not look like himself. And I think the best player on the team right now is Caden Sorrell. And outside of being a game time decision, which was very surprising because I saw him have a cast on his hand, which the fans of the game actually had a great image of that. You thought he was out for the season, but apparently maybe precautionary, who knows? We'll find out. But he looks like the best player on this team. He looks like the most talented guy. He's produced like it. Guys like Terrence Keel have kind of dropped off a little bit. Granted, he's a freshman. And Wyatt Hensler has been good, but not great like we thought he'd be. So again, you can judge a head coach and based on what he's getting out of the talent on that roster. And at the same time, though, I don't know if I'm going to put all the blame on him. And I believe I said this earlier, is that Caleb Longley, I think, is the biggest issue. I think if you are going to take the gamble in year 2 with Early, you have to change that staff up. Maybe look at Jason Kelly, their pitching coach, a little closer, and see if he's really somebody you want to keep on staff who's really going to help develop these younger pitchers coming up. There's a lot that they can think about. I just think that because of the way, and we don't have to spend a lot of time, softball lost the other night, just in the classic Aggie fashion of losing to a team that they're not supposed to beat them, and they're not a laughing stock, and it's the way they lost, and they were the number 1 overall seed for the first time, and A&M is scared of number 1. All those narratives, I think it's feeding into a lot of the fan base. They just want change, right? They just want them to make a change. They want Trev Alberts to just either fire him and move on. But at the same time, I keep hearing from people who are deeper in the college baseball business have said that, look, you could fire Early and that's fine, but what candidate do you have lined up? Because a lot of these guys, after Schlossnagle left, did get locked up with their teams. And granted, Alabama's coach, I'm blanking on his name.
Vaughn.
Right. Yes. Rob Vaughn. Thank you. Who does have ties to A&M. Yes, that's an option I've seen. The fan base really loves him. Obviously, he's a young, up-and-coming guy, has done very well with Alabama. Alabama's not known as a baseball school, and he's really turned them into one. And I guess you'd have to back up the Brinks truck, and you'd have to pay him a ton of money, and you're still paying Jimbo Fisher. We did an article about that, the allocation the other day, the spending for severance, which was like $25 million. So it's like, do they have the funds? I don't know. There's all these questions I'm not getting answers to, but and I've been talking about this for a week now, and it's actually tiring, but yeah, I think they just have to be very careful with this decision, because I know that it seems very early or very easy to just fire Early and move on and try to find somebody else, but it could be detrimental to your roster and your future.
Yeah, I think it's going to say a lot about Trev, who I've defended like time and time again, and I still will until we see how this plays out. But I think with the way things started, he should have been making calls back in like March, and like just like putting out feelers saying, hey, like, what's he interested in this job? Like, who out there, put at least a preliminary list of candidates together who you could potentially target if you do make a change. It's something I hate talking about, but I mean, it's just part of life. People in this sport, either you're awesome and you get extensions and you get paid well, or you get fired and you get paid well. So either way, it works out pretty well for him. So I'm not going to feel too bad, but
what a life.
Yeah, I know it's very unfortunate.
Nice.
Yeah. I won't say too much. I think if it were me, I would probably look to make a change. I just, and people will say like, oh, the roster, we just, like all that kind of stuff. I'm like, the buyouts, like compared to how much we care about this sport, how much the fan base cares about baseball, the buyout is peanuts. It really is. It's not going to make a dent in anything else that we're trying to do right now. So if that means you lose, I'm not going to name any names because I don't know what that situation is like. Honestly, I don't care who you lose. Like it is a blow up the whole thing, nuke the whole thing, start from scratch, get someone in here who can fix it, can rebuild it. I think people say this. I tend to agree. A&M should be a top 5 job in baseball. There's no doubt about it. Top 3, most likely, if we're being honest. So there's no reason why you can't go out and hire someone who can, especially in today's game, who can flip it around very quickly. I mean, other coaches have done that at places not far from our school, which we hate to see. But
what are you talking about, Will?
Yeah.
What are you hinting at?
But yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
I tend to agree, and look, I'm generally not the one who's all about like the emotional firings or feeling like that you have to make a move just because things didn't go the way you wanted them to. And especially, I think on paper, when you say that you've got a first-year head coach, normally that like all but eliminates the idea of getting rid of a guy just because it seems insane to have that short of a leash. But I do feel like this was a unique circumstance, referencing a lot of the stuff y'all have already talked about, that a big part of the early hire was the continuity of keeping this roster together because it had the potential to be the most talented roster in baseball. And we thought that you keep these guys together and they've got a shot at winning a national championship. And so you kind of went into this saying there's a chance that even if everything goes great in year one, that year one is kind of the peak. And then from there, we don't know what Michael Earley really is as far as, culture building, roster building, long term, how he builds his program and what that's going to look like. But we thought that because you're keeping a guy from the previous staff, that you could kind of keep the wheels in motion of what was already obviously working very, very well under Schloss. So having all of that said, for things to go this badly in year one, I feel like it's a really tough sell to bring him back because what's the hope for the future? Because are you going to have a roster that's more talented than this? It seems unlikely. Now, Cameron, you referenced maybe you can make a hitting coach change or change up some things and that makes a difference. But it's a hard sell, especially from the fan perspective. I think if you bring him back, there's going to be a lot of folks that are going to be in full on wait and see mode, if not full on pessimistic mode. I think about this program if he comes back, and and that's a sucky place to be. And that's not to say that he's incapable of turning it around. Certainly, crazier things have happened, but I'm kind of with Will that if it were up to me, which it's not, I
mean, hey, if you yell loud enough and tweet loud
I-
enough, maybe you'll have
Hey, like you said, we did it with Mark Stoops, right? Why
Yeah,
can't we just yell really loud on
former
on
Texas
Twitter
A&M
and see
head
what
coach
happens?
Mark Stoops.
I think we have more pull than we might give ourselves credit for.
No, you did. No, that's why I said it. Like, that's the thing. I'm partially joking, but at the same time, I remember that night, and I remember I was getting all this intel. I was talking directly to people, and I was like, okay, what the hell is going on here? Because I'm getting one guy telling me that's a done deal, another guy going, wait, hold on a minute. And I'm like, wait. And then I see all these tweets, and I'm not gonna even name some of it, but it was pretty vicious from like bigger profile, not just like the trolls, right? And I was like, okay, they may have a big part in this because all of a sudden things just turned the other day. And I think Elko got hired like 3 days later or maybe
I think it was like 3 hours later. It was like the next day. Like,
it was not, it was pretty
before
quick.
lunchtime. Yeah.
No, I agree with both of you guys because I was just kind of setting the question. My opinion on this keeps changing because I am of that ilk of give a guy at least a little more time. But I have seen this fan base really sour outside of the really. I mean, you don't call them 2%ers. There are a lot of those who are just I'll give an example. Like my dad, who is an 82 graduate, he'll pay attention. He loves Aggie sports, but he'll say, look, he'll ask me a question all the time. What's going on here? What's going on here? He'll watch the games, but at the same time, he's retired and 65, and he's not going to pay attention to every detail that's going on. But then there's others who will pay attention to every minute detail that's going on. And those who go to every game and buy season tickets and are really into what A&M baseball represents. If they're the ones souring on this program, that is a bad deal for the future. And you don't want to invest in a guy who they really don't have any hope with in terms of building. And there's the favoritism with the roster now is what it is. Like if you like your players, like I personally, from a baseball perspective, I love Weston Moss. I love that kid. I think he's a dynamite pitcher. I think he's going to be a future star. I think he's already shown that ability. But again, I wouldn't destroy a program's future just because I like a handful of players and I don't want them to leave. It just doesn't make any sense. And it goes back to we're always going to go back to football on this podcast because it is a football show. And you go back to the 22 historic recruiting class. There were players in that class that you thought, okay, they'd be perfect fits here. But at the same time, is it worth gambling your entire future over because they're super talented or they're not fits? And we have found out in the Mike Elko era that talent is awesome and you need it to succeed in the SEC and win a championship in college football, but you also need to be a fit. and you need to fit what that program is asking you to do, whether it's scheme or culture or whatever. And if you don't have that, you really don't have anything. You're not going to be very successful. So I don't know everything that's going on. And, you watch every game this season, and the problems are pretty in your face, right? You know that they can't hit consistently. You know that guys like Ryan Prager have not really lived up to what we thought he was going to be after he came back. He could have gone to the MLB after being drafted in the 3rd round. Just the parts that you thought were going to work. Jace Levelette's really number one outside of that stretch he had against Arkansas. They just haven't lived up to the part. They haven't to that number one preseason ranking. And if you're any type of baseball fan, you really just look at that. Even if you're not an A&M fan, you look at that from the outside point of view and go, that team was number one? Really? They got swept by Missouri. They have 28 wins on the year, and they basically have to win the SC tournament, the hardest tournament to win, to get to the postseason. Like, what happened, right? And we can tell you, like, this is it. But at the same time, we just don't know if he can't handle this. Maybe Early just can't handle this level of a program. We'll find out pretty quickly, because if they lose to Mississippi State, the wheels are going to roll. We're either going to find out if he's going to come back or if they're going to make a change pretty quickly, is what I've heard on either front. But obviously we don't have any breaking information here. They still have to play a game. So
I think our friend String, I think he put it pretty simply. It's not really asking like, why should you fire him? It's why should you keep him? Like, why?
Yeah.
Like what has he shown? And not to dog on him, but like it's a genuine question. Like, what has he shown at this point with a full season of evidence, of data? What about that gives you confidence when, like Robert said, when you're not as talented? Like there's players on this team who are going to get drafted very highly. A couple for sure will not be here next year. Specifically, Jace Prager, probably Justin Lampkin, guys like that. So when you had that, and you like riding off the momentum from last year, and you just completely fall flat, like what sparks confidence about what you see? And maybe it's the like the road series wins are impressive. There's no doubt. Like Tennessee and Arkansas. That's impressive, but when you add it all up and look at the whole picture, I mean, there's just not a lot there on the whole that would make me feel very confident going forward.
Yeah, it's like any job, right? Because I'll just make this quick point. It's like any job, and you really have to look at what you've accomplished over the last year. I mean, you work for any manager or something, you go over the goals you had, what you accomplished, what you're doing, what you're looking to work on next quarter or whatever. We all know that from careers and stuff like that. So it's like, again, what does he really have to show? Struggle. Oh, he got those road wins. But guess what? I was looking at a stat the other day. Tennessee has 4 SEC series wins. So what does that tell you? You look at Schlossnagle's situation, where he brought Max Wiener, one of the rising coaches in all of college baseball, who should be a head coach sooner than later. I honestly thought that Mississippi State would throw every dollar they had at him, but he's been a huge part of any success they've had, because they haven't been able to hit the ball very well, and they've still won a lot based on elite pitching. And that's going to get you forward. And we just talked about it, that your starting pitching was supposed to be the reason you won a lot of games. And outside of some great performances from Lampkin, Miles Patton being okay here and there in every third game of the series, Ryan Prager has not lived up to it at all. He's had some real stinkers, I would say, like throughout the season. He's had his moments, but really has not been A&M's best pitcher. And so if you don't have those core strengths, again, what do you go off of, right? What do you say? Well, we did this, but we didn't do this for this, and then we lost to Missouri. It's just not good for him, right? There's nothing really on his resume that screams, bring me back.
Well, see, I think you just stumbled upon the solution here. Is you just fire Michael Earley, hire Max Wiener as our head coach, and then you just bring Michael Earley back as your hitting coach, and you're paying your own offset.
All would be forgiven.
I mean, I'd be so in on that. I mean, God, I had the best month writing and talking about that. But I mean, I don't know.
I've got to go delete some tweets.
God, yeah, the entire.
But I do think though that from the baseball perspective, just looking at it as like the fan reaction, I think the one area where baseball is kind of getting the short end of the stick is that we gave them such a short leash because of the way this kind of whole athletics year has gone for A&M. Because you had football who started 7-1. We were all ecstatic after that LSU win, and then kind of crashed and burned down the stretch. You had basketball was in the top 10, was looking like one of the best teams in the country, and then gets knocked out by Texas in the SEC tournament and fails to make it out of the first weekend in March Madness again. So I think a lot of people, after everything that had gone wrong, were still like, but thank God for baseball. And they thought baseball was going to be the thing that redeemed it all and kind of pulled us out of this malaise that seemingly the whole athletic department had been in.
Yeah.
And then it turned out to be maybe the most disappointing group out of any of them. In fact, that's probably not even a maybe.
Yeah.
And so I definitely think that the fan reaction is even more severe because of like everything that led up to that.